Well, today, State Delegate Glenn Davis will brief Virginia Beach City Council on the future of medical marijuana in the Commonwealth. And this comes after Governor Ralph Northam signed 2 new laws about cannabis oils.
Elise Brown is live in Town Center now with a look at what that means for residents. Good morning, Elise.
Hey, good morning, Ashley and Lucy. So City Council is really going to get to ask whatever they want about cannabis oil. Let's talk about some of the back history of this. Delegate Glenn Davis, now he's one of the lawmakers who supported the governor's bill of using cannabis oil for medical purposes. Back in the spring, Governor Northam signed HB 1251 and SB 726. Now, the change in law does not legalize marijuana. However, it does allow what's called an affirmative defense, meaning if a person was stopped by police, they could present a letter from their doctor. We asked Davis why he supports the use of cannabis oil.
CBD oil has been known to help people with everything from epilepsy to cancer to Crohn's disease. And it's also been able to replace opioids in certain other situations as well. And anything we can do to help Virginians cope with some of the, honestly, most, I guess, and toughest diseases, as well as start to go further down the path of alternate medicines that we can prescribe in replacement of opioids.
Davis says this will also provide an economic opportunity for the area. The city is expected to discuss that aspect of this as well this afternoon. Live in Virginia Beach, Elise Brown, 13 News Now.